My parents left me out of the family photo. Now they hang my portrait in their office. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I learned to be quiet early. Not because anyone told me to, but because speaking seemed to make me disappear even more completely than silence did. Our house had this peculiar acoustics voices would carry from room to room with crystal clarity, except mine. When my sister Emma called for help with homework, Mom would drop whatever she was doing and rush upstairs. When my brother Jake needed a ride to soccer practice, Dad would grab his keys before Jake finished asking. But when I spoke, it was as if my words dissolved in the air between my lips and their ears. I was 7 when I first noticed the family photos lining the hallway. Emma's school pictures dominated the timeline kindergarten through high school, her smile growing more confident each year. Jake's sports photos were scattered between them: Little League, middle school basketball, high school football in his Letterman jacket. I found myself in exactly 3 frames out of 27. In 2 of them, I was barely visible in the background. In the 3rd, I was cut off at the shoulder. "You were probably in the bathroom when we took that one," Mom said when I asked about it once. But I remembered that day. I remembered standing right there, waiting to be included, watching the camera click without me. My parents weren't cruel people. They didn't yell or punish me harshly. They simply existed in a world where I was peripheral, like background music they'd grown so accustomed to they no longer heard it. Emma was their bright star valedictorian prom queen, full scholarship to Northwestern. Jake was their athlete state championships, college scouts, endless trophies cluttering the mantle. I was their question mark. I loved to draw. From the time I could hold a crayon, I was sketching everything around me, the way light fell through the kitchen window, the neighbor's dog sleeping in a patch of sun, Emma's profile when she read. I filled notebook after notebook with my observations of the world, trying to capture the beauty I saw everywhere. "Why don't you draw normal things?" Mom asked once, flipping through my sketchbook. She paused at a drawing I'd made of an old man feeding pigeons in the park. "This is just sad." I tried to explain that I found beauty in quiet moments, in overlooked corners of life. But she'd already moved on, called away by Emma needing help choosing a dress for homecoming. When I was 12, I won a regional art competition. The prize was a 500 scholarship and a feature in the local newspaper. I ran home with the certificate, breathless with excitement, ready to share my first real achievement. "That's nice, sweetheart," Mom said, not looking up from the bills she was sorting. "Can you tell your father dinner's ready?" The certificate went into a kitchen drawer, buried under takeout menus and expired coupons. Emma's honor roll certificates were framed and hung in the dining room. Jake's participation trophies lined every available shelf. My scholarship letter was forgotten by the next morning. I learned not to expect celebration. I learned not to expect attention. I learned that my achievements were small and personal, not meant for sharing. I kept drawing, kept winning smaller competitions, kept trying to find my place in a family that seemed complete without me. High school brought new dynamics. Emma had graduated and moved away to college, leaving behind a shrine of memories and empty expectations. Jake was in his glory years, the star quarterback with recruitment letters arriving daily. I was 15, invisible as ever, spending my lunch periods in the art room and my evenings in my bedroom, sketching by lamplight. "Your brother's got scouts coming to the game Friday," Dad announced at dinner one Thursday. "The whole family needs to be there." I had planned to enter a piece in the state art competition that weekend. The deadline was Monday, and I needed to finish my portfolio. But "the whole family needs to be there" meant Emma would drive down from college, and we'd all wear Jake's jersey number, and I'd sit in the bleachers pretending to understand football while thinking about the painting I wasn't completing. We won the game. Jake threw 3 touchdown passes. The scouts took notes. That night, our neighbors came over to celebrate, and I listened from my bedroom as everyone toasted Jake's bright future. When I came downstairs for water, Mrs. Henderson from next door smiled at me kindly. "And what are you up to these days?" she asked. Before I could answer, Mom jumped in. "Oh, you know teenagers, always locked away doing mysterious things." It wasn't malicious. It was just dismissive, as if my art, my competitions, my dreams were too trivial to mention alongside Jake's athletic achievements. I submitted my portfolio late that Monday, rushing to the post office after school. I didn't win, but I placed third high enough to catch the attention of a local gallery owner who offered me a summer internship. When I told my parents, they nodded and smiled, but I could see their minds were elsewhere. Jake had just committed to a Division I school, and the celebration was already being planned. The internship changed everything for me. Working at the gallery, I met artists and collectors, learned about the business side of art, discovered I had an eye not just for creating but for curation. The gallery owner, Mrs. Chen, became the first adult who truly saw my potential. "You have something special," she told me one afternoon as we hung a new exhibition. "Not just talent, but vision. Don't let anyone convince you it's not enough." I worked there through my junior and senior years, absorbing everything I could. While Jake received dozens of college recruitment letters, I quietly applied to art schools on the East Coast. I wrote my essays about invisibility, about finding beauty in overlooked moments, about the strength that comes from learning to believe in yourself when no one else does. I was accepted to several programs, but I chose the one farthest from home. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. I needed space to become whoever I was meant to be, away from the shadow of invisibility that followed me through our house. The announcement of my acceptance was met with the same polite interest as always. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, but her attention was already shifting to Emma's engagement party planning. Dad nodded approvingly and went back to helping Jake choose between scholarship offers. I left for college that fall with 2 suitcases and a portfolio of my best work. No one offered to drive me to the airport. I took a taxi, watching our house disappear through the rear window, feeling something that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite relief. College was a revelation. Surrounded by other people who saw art as essential rather than frivolous, I bloomed. My professors challenged me, my classmates inspired me, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen, really seen, not as someone's little sister or someone's disappointing child, but as myself. I called home every few weeks, dutifully reporting my grades and activities to parents who listened with half attention and always seemed eager to get off the phone. They had news about Emma's wedding planning, Jake's starting position on the college team, their own busy lives. I was still peripheral, even from 3,000 miles away. In my sophomore year, something happened that would crystallize everything I'd been feeling my entire life. I was home for Thanksgiving break, enjoying a rare few days when the house felt almost peaceful. Emma was there with her fiancé, Jake was back from college, and for once, I felt like maybe I belonged in this picture of family togetherness. Then Mom announced she had scheduled a family portrait session for the day after Thanksgiving. "It's been so long since we've had professional photos taken," she said excitedly. "With Emma's wedding coming up and Jake doing so well in school, it just feels like the right time to document this moment." She was practically glowing as she described her vision, the perfect family portrait to send as Christmas cards, to frame for the living room, to capture this golden period when both her older children were thriving. I waited for her to mention what I should wear, when I should be ready. But as she continued talking about location and timing and the photographer she'd hired, a cold understanding began to settle over me. "What time should I be ready?" I finally asked. Mom looked up from her notes, momentarily confused. "Oh, honey, you don't need to worry about it. We're just doing something small and simple." "I'm part of the family," I said quietly. "Of course you are," she said, but her tone was already shifting to that patient voice she used when she thought I was being difficult. "It's just that we want to capture Emma and Jake at this particular moment in their lives. You understand?" I did understand. I understood that their vision of family, the version worthy of professional documentation, didn't include me. I was 20 years old, standing in the kitchen where I'd grown up, and I was still invisible. The photo session happened on a crisp Friday morning while I was supposedly sleeping in, but I wasn't sleeping. I was watching from my bedroom window as my family gathered on the front lawn, radiant in their coordinated outfits, Emma in a cream sweater that brought out her eyes, Jake in a navy shirt that emphasized his broad shoulders, Mom and Dad looking proud and polished. The photographer directed them through pose after pose, sitting on the porch steps, standing under the old oak tree, laughing together in that spontaneous way that somehow always looks natural in professional photos. I watched them become the perfect family they'd always been in their own minds. Successful, beautiful, complete. They looked happy. They looked like they belonged together. And they looked exactly right without me. I don't remember making the decision to leave. I just remember packing my things while they were still outside, their laughter drifting through the windows. I wrote a note something about needing to get back to school early, about having projects to finish, and left it on the kitchen counter. I took a bus to the airport and changed my flight. By the time they came inside, glowing from their perfect photo session, I was already gone. The photos were beautiful. Mom posted them on social media within days, the four of them looking like something out of a catalog, all genuine smiles and coordinated elegance. The comments poured in about what a beautiful family they were, how lucky they were to have such successful children, how picture-perfect they all looked. I stared at those photos on my laptop screen in my dorm room, and for the first time in my life, the invisibility didn't hurt. It clarified everything. This was who they were. This was who they chose to be. And I was free to become someone else entirely. I threw myself into my art with new intensity. I stopped calling home except for obligatory holiday check-ins. I stopped expecting invitations that wouldn't come, stopped hoping for interest that wouldn't materialize. Instead, I poured everything into becoming the artist I knew I could be. My junior year, I had my first solo show at a small gallery near campus. My senior year, I won a prestigious fellowship that would fund 2 years of independent work. After graduation, I moved to New York with nothing but my portfolio and an unshakable belief in my own vision. The city was brutal and beautiful and exactly what I needed. I worked as a gallery assistant by day and painted by night in a studio apartment in Queens that was barely large enough for my easel. I lived on coffee and determination and the intoxicating freedom of defining success on my own terms. My work began to gain attention. First, a group show in Chelsea, then a review in a small art magazine, then a collector who bought 3 pieces at once and commissioned a 4th. Slowly, carefully, I built a reputation as an artist who could capture the profound in the everyday, who found beauty in the spaces between more obvious subjects. I specialized in portraits of people who were usually invisible elderly subway musicians, late-night diner waitresses, children playing in empty lots. My paintings celebrated the overlooked, the peripheral, the quietly extraordinary. Critics began to notice my unique perspective on contemporary isolation and my ability to find dignity in marginalized subjects. 5 years after that Thanksgiving photo session, I had my breakthrough. A solo show at a respected Soho gallery, a write-up in Art Forum, and sales that finally allowed me to quit my day job and focus entirely on painting. The opening night was packed with collectors, critics, and other artists whose work I'd long admired. Standing in that gallery, surrounded by my paintings and people who understood what I was trying to say with them, I felt complete in a way I'd never experienced. I had created this life entirely on my own terms, built this success from nothing but talent and determination, and the hard-won knowledge that I didn't need anyone else's approval to matter. That night, I checked my phone for the first time in hours and found 17 missed calls from home. The calls had started around the time my gallery opening began. Emma had seen the Art Forum article. Someone from Northwestern had tagged her on Facebook. Within hours, my parents were calling everyone they knew, sharing the news that their child was being featured in a national art magazine. I listened to the voicemails in the Uber ride back to my apartment. Mom's voice, breathless with excitement. "Honey, we just saw the article." "We're so proud. Call us back." Dad's voice, awkward but earnest. Congratulations on the gallery show. Your mother's been showing everyone the magazine. Jake, surprisingly, dude, this is actually really cool. I had no idea you were doing stuff this big. But it was Emma's message that stopped me cold. I just wanted to say I'm sorry it took a magazine article for them to really see what you've been doing all along. I see it now too. I should have seen it before. I didn't call them back that night, or the next day. I needed time to process this sudden flood of attention from people who had been content to ignore me for decades. Over the following weeks, the calls and messages continued. Mom sent a care package with a note about how she'd always known I was special and had been telling everyone about my artistic talents for years. Dad forwarded me articles about successful artists as if we'd been having ongoing conversations about my career. Jake posted one of my paintings on his Instagram with a caption about his incredibly talented sibling. The attention felt hollow, not because it wasn't genuine. I could tell they were truly excited and proud, but because it was contingent. They were proud because the world had told them to be proud. Their excitement was borrowed from external validation rather than any deep understanding or appreciation of who I was or what my work meant. 6 months later, a friend from high school sent me a photo that made everything crystalline. She'd been at her parents' house for dinner and had stopped by my parents' real estate office to say hello. There, behind my mother's desk, hung a large framed print of one of my paintings, the centerpiece of my Soho show, a portrait of an elderly woman waiting for the bus, dignity radiating from every brushstroke. Your mom spent 20 minutes telling me about your career, my friend texted. She has the Art Forum article framed next to the painting. Says she always knew you'd make it big in art. I stared at that photo for a long time. There was my work, prominently displayed in the office where my mother conducted business, where she met with clients and colleagues. She was using my art to decorate her professional space, using my success as part of her own identity. The woman who had once asked why I didn't draw normal things now had my painting as the focal point of her office. The parents who had left me out of family photos were now proudly displaying my art like a trophy. I felt something I hadn't expected. Not anger, but a kind of distant sadness. Not for myself, but for them. They were finally ready to love me, but only the version of me that others had deemed worthy. They wanted to claim me now, but they had missed the journey that made me who I was. I thought about that scared, invisible child who had watched from the bedroom window as his family posed for pictures without him. I thought about all the art competitions they'd ignored, all the achievements they'd dismissed, all the moments when their attention would have meant everything to me. But I also thought about the artist I'd become precisely because of that invisibility. My work resonated with people because I understood what it meant to be overlooked. I could capture dignity in forgotten moments because I had lived in those moments. My success wasn't in spite of my childhood, it was because of it. A year later, I was invited to speak at a conference about contemporary portraiture. As I prepared my presentation, I kept coming back to the idea of seeing and being seen, how art can make the invisible visible, how recognition can be both everything and nothing, depending on when it comes. After the talk, a young artist approached me, maybe 19, earnest and eager in the way I remembered being. She thanked me for my comments about finding your voice as an outsider. My family doesn't really understand what I'm trying to do, she said. They think art isn't a real career. I looked at her, this talented, determined young woman who reminded me so much of myself at that age, and I knew exactly what to tell her. Make your work so undeniably good that the world has to pay attention, I said. And by the time your family catches up, you won't need them to. You'll know your worth independent of their recognition. She nodded, scribbling notes, and I realized I was giving her the advice I'd needed to hear 20 years ago. That night, I finally returned one of my mother's calls. "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you called," she said. "I was just telling Mrs. Patterson about your lecture series. She's so impressed that we have a famous artist in the family." There it was, the pride, the excitement, the genuine enthusiasm for my success. And underneath it, the assumption that this version of me was the one worth celebrating, that my value was tied to external recognition rather than the years of work that had led to this moment. "Mom, I said gently. I've been an artist my whole life. I know, sweetheart, and we've always been proud. I didn't argue with her. There was no point in relitigating the past or demanding apologies for old wounds. Instead, I told her about my upcoming shows, my new body of work, the gallery representation I'd signed. I let her be excited, let her share the news with her friends, let her claim me as part of her story. But I also knew, with a clarity that felt like freedom, that her pride was no longer necessary for my happiness. I had learned to see myself clearly, to value my work independent of anyone else's recognition. I had built a life and career and sense of self that belonged entirely to me. The last time I was home, 3 years ago now, I noticed that the hallway photos had been updated. The wall that had once been dominated by Emma's school pictures and Jake's sports achievements now included several professional photos of me images from gallery openings, a headshot from a magazine feature, a photo of me standing next to one of my paintings. I looked like I belonged there, finally integrated into the visual narrative of our family's success. But looking at those photos, I felt like I was seeing someone else's life. The validation I had craved as a child felt irrelevant as an adult who had learned to validate himself. My parents are good people. They love their children in the way they know how, and they're genuinely proud of what I've accomplished. They're not villains in this story, they're just people who needed permission from the outside world to see what was always there. But I learned something valuable from growing up invisible. I learned that the only recognition that truly matters is the recognition you give yourself. I learned that being overlooked can be a gift if you use it to develop your own vision. I learned that success tastes different when you've built it entirely on your own terms. My work continues to evolve. I'm preparing for a retrospective at MoMA next year, and I've been commissioned to create a series of portraits for the Whitney. The art world that once seemed impossibly distant has become my home, filled with people who understand that visibility is earned through dedication and vision rather than given through birth or circumstance. Sometimes people ask me about my family, about whether success has brought us closer together. The answer is complicated. We're closer in some ways. They're genuinely interested in my career now, and I've learned to appreciate their belated recognition for what it is. But there's a distance that can't be bridged, a fundamental difference in how we understand love and attention and worth. Last Christmas, I flew home for the first time in 2 years. The house looked the same, but everything felt different. Emma was there with her husband and 2 young children, Jake with his new girlfriend who worked in sports marketing. The dinner table conversation revolved around my recent exhibition in Paris, my upcoming book of collected works, the documentary filmmaker who wanted to interview me about my artistic process. "We're just so proud," Mom kept saying, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You've accomplished so much." I smiled and accepted the praise, but part of me kept thinking about the 12-year-old who had won his first art competition and been met with distracted acknowledgement. I thought about all the drawings I'd shown them, all the small victories that had gone uncelebrated, all the times I'd needed their attention and been given their absence instead. After dinner, Jake pulled me aside. He was different now, more thoughtful, less consumed with his own reflection than he'd been in high school. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I was so focused on my own thing back then, I never really paid attention to what you were doing. I saw your show in Chicago last month. My girlfriend dragged me to it, actually. It was incredible. I mean, I don't know much about art, but I know when something moves me, you know? I was touched by his sincerity, but also struck by the timing." Jake was 31 years old. He was apologizing for not paying attention to me when we were teenagers, but it had taken a girlfriend's interest in art and my international recognition for him to finally see my work. "I'm glad you got to see it," I said, and I meant it. But I also knew that his apology, like my parents' pride, was filtered through external validation rather than any deep understanding of what my childhood had been like for me. Emma's approach was different. She didn't offer apologies or explanations. Instead, she asked questions about my process, about what inspired specific pieces, about how I'd developed my artistic vision. She seemed genuinely curious about the journey, not just the destination. "I've been thinking a lot about that Thanksgiving when you left early," she said one afternoon while her kids napped. I didn't understand it then, but looking back, she trailed off, and I waited to see if she would finish the thought. "I think we were so busy performing being a family that we forgot to actually be one," she said finally. It was the closest anyone had come to acknowledging what that time had been like for me. Not an apology exactly, but a recognition that something had been missing, something important. The photo from that session, the one that had crystallized my invisibility, was still hanging in the living room, now surrounded by newer family portraits that included me. Looking at it, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was still a small ache when I saw how complete they looked without me, but it was overlaid now with something else. Gratitude. That photo had been devastating at the time, but it had also been liberating. It had forced me to confront the reality of my place in their world and make a choice about how to respond. I could have spent years trying to earn my way into their version of family, contorting myself to fit their expectations. Instead, I had chosen to build something entirely my own. On the flight back to New York, I thought about a conversation I'd had with my therapist years earlier. I'd been struggling with whether to maintain contact with my family, whether their newfound interest in my success was genuine enough to build a relationship on. "The question isn't whether they love you the right way," she'd said. "The question is whether you can accept the way they love you while still protecting the self you've worked so hard to build." It had taken me years to understand what she meant, but sitting on that plane, watching the landscape of my childhood disappear below, I finally got it. My parents' love was real, but it was conditional in ways they probably didn't even recognize. They loved successful me, accomplished me, validated by the world me. They had always struggled to love uncertain me, searching me, not yet recognized me. And that was okay now. I had learned to love all versions of myself, including the invisible child who had needed their attention so desperately. I had become the parent to that child that I'd needed them to be. The retrospective at MoMA opened 6 months later to critical acclaim and record attendance. The exhibition, titled Visible Invisible: Portraits of the Overlooked, traced the evolution of my work from my earliest pieces to my most recent series. The opening night was a celebration of everything I'd built over 2 decades of dedicated work. My family flew in for the opening. They stood in the galleries surrounded by my life's work, beaming with pride as art critics and collectors approached them to offer congratulations. Mom gave interviews to local reporters about always knowing I was destined for greatness. Dad shook hands with museum donors and spoke knowledgeably about my artistic development, as if he'd been following it closely all along. Watching them, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was still a part of me that wished they had been there for the journey, not just the destination, but there was also a deep satisfaction in seeing how far I'd traveled from that invisible child to this moment of undeniable recognition. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a new series I'd been working on for 3 years. Large-scale paintings of family photographs, but with one figure removed from each image. The empty spaces where someone should have been were rendered in translucent layers that suggested presence through absence. The series was called The Missing Member, and it explored themes of invisibility, belonging, and the stories families tell about themselves. Several critics noted the autobiographical elements in the work, the way it seemed to examine the artist's own relationship with family and recognition. But what they didn't know was that the series had taught me something important. Sometimes being absent from the picture is exactly where you need to be to see it clearly. After the opening, my family and I went to dinner at a restaurant near the museum. The conversation flowed easily now, lubricated by shared pride and the glow of public recognition. But as we talked, I found myself studying them with the same attention I brought to my portrait subjects, looking for the stories underneath the surface, the emotions they couldn't quite articulate. I saw my mother's genuine happiness at my success, but also her need to claim credit for it, to position herself as the supportive parent she'd never quite learned to be. I saw my father's awkward pride, his struggle to understand my work, combined with his determination to appear knowledgeable about it. I saw Emma's complex mix of admiration and guilt, her belated recognition of dynamics she'd been too young to understand. I saw Jake's simpler pleasure in having a successful sibling, uncomplicated by the deeper emotional currents that affected the rest of us. They were doing their best with the tools they had, just as they always had. The difference now was that I no longer needed them to do better. I had built a life that fulfilled me independent of their approval or understanding. As I write this, 5 years have passed since that retrospective. My work continues to evolve and find new audiences. I've been teaching workshops for young artists, many of whom come from families that don't understand or support their artistic ambitions. I tell them what I wish someone had told me at their age, that recognition is wonderful when it comes, but it can't be the foundation of your self-worth. I still maintain relationships with my family, though they're different now than they might have been if we'd found our way to each other earlier. We see each other for holidays and major life events. They follow my career with genuine interest and pride. But there's an understanding between us now that wasn't there before, an acknowledgement that we love each other across a distance that can't quite be bridged. My nephew, Emma's oldest boy, is 8 now. He reminds me of myself at that age, quiet, observant, always drawing in the margins of his schoolwork. Emma mentioned recently that he's been asking about art classes, that he seems to have inherited the family talent. I've started sending him art supplies and encouraging letters. I want him to know that someone sees his potential, that his observations and creations matter, that he doesn't have to wait for the world's permission to call himself an artist. Maybe that's my real legacy, not the paintings hanging in museums or the critical acclaim, but the possibility that one small boy will grow up knowing he's visible, knowing his vision matters, knowing he belongs in whatever picture he chooses to create. The invisible child I used to be would have found that deeply satisfying. The artist I've become finds it essential. They finally see me, but only because the world does. I stopped needing their eyes long ago.